It pleases me to die.
Hello, this is Kaiser Clark here with a episode of my podcast. I've always wanted to do a podcast and take it more seriously. As you know, I have a podcast on Anchor called YEAHEAME, and discipline, coordination with people, ideas that are useful enough to be spoken about for more than 5 minutes. That's why my podcast is not, taken off and been a weekly venture. But that being said, I've had this thought on my mind that came to me during conversation, and the thought was the distance between the example and the explanation. One more time, the distance between the example and the explanation. This thought came to me because I was watching, as we've all been watching here and there, we've seen the Donda release for Kanye. Now, I hate using entertainers. Like, I really wish I could use, Aristotle or something as an example, but a lot of people don't understand or they've never really looked at those things. So I'm using Kanye merely because it's in the consciousness. And it is where the thought came from. Because the example that he's setting is unprecedented, right? It's like, oh God, look at this musical guy, shoe guy, billionaire, whatever. The example he's setting is like, how can you do that, right? And it's so far removed from the explanation, right? You could read 1 million self-help books and you're not going to turn into Kanye West. And that's where the thought came. And it's a thought to really sit back on. Because a lot of times, I believe there's these symbols that we have, that we speak of as if that's supposed to be the explanation. I think a good example of this is in religious terms. Any religious figure, they are the example. Why they do what they do, how to do what they do, and the reasoning behind what they do, that is the explanation, and they are astronomically different, right? You can meditate for 90 years. You're not going to become Buddha. And as I've been working through this thought, preparing to speak about it and put it out onto the internet for whoever is ever going to listen to it, it really takes something to process the difference between the explanation and the example. And I feel like you have to make a distinction at a certain point in your life. You're either going to I'm not going to do that. I hate people do two examples. You do this or that. I'm going to say there's two options that I feel are the most prominent that you have to make. And these decisions are, you're either going to try your hardest to be living in a way where it can be followed and it can be explained to someone else and they can easily take your path, or you're going to focus on being the example. And a lot of leadership fails on either front. You either aren't explaining what you're doing good enough, so you're setting a bad example, or you're so focused on being the example and being the person who did it that you're leaving out a lot of the explanation. Obviously, the middle ground is the best. To be the best leader, to be the best person in a certain position, you have to be able to explain how you got there, right? That's what people want to know. How'd you get here? You can't explain it because you're so hyper-focused on being the example. You've now tilted the perception of your position to make it as if, well, now I don't really want to be the example because look at this guy. He's so full of himself. He's acting as if mystical powers are how he got to where he's at. That's not necessarily what everyone does, but a lot of people who become public figures or things of that nature, a lot of them like to remain aloof, or they like to hide exactly how they came to be the example. A good example of what I'm talking about is Kid Rock. Kid Rock portrays himself as if he was self-made from the bottom to the top, as if he started his career 20 something years ago, almost 30 years ago, from the bottom with nothing, and he became this, cultural phenomenon. I don't want to say icon, but he became this big musical act, right? I think Kid Rock could probably still sell out a stadium of like 8,000. He could probably still sell 5,000 tickets to this day. That being said, his dad is rich, right? So if that was added into his explanation of how he got on, that would highlight more of the reality, and it wouldn't be this sense of like, well, I made it because I'm so great and I got it from the mud, because very few people, I won't say very few, I'll say getting it from the mud, if it was that easy, more people would be getting it, you see, because there's many people in the mud. So I have been mulling over this thought of the difference between the example and the explanation. Because when we go to school, we are really only given the explanation. We're given an example rarely, or the little tidbits. Those are my favorite parts of my history book, the tidbits. I like the tidbits. The rest of it was kind of like, you could tell they were like, yada, 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 America, yada, 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 civil rights, yada, 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 war on drugs. Like, it was never like a deep, honest representation of history. But the tidbits for me, I don't know why I always liked that. They would be like, oh, and this year this happened. Like a little side note, So those are the examples, though. All we're getting is the explanation. Okay, well, these examples to me are worthy of a deeper analysis, because that's what everybody is striving for. And you could lie to yourself and say you're not striving to be like Kanye West, but if you take away the personality, and if you take away the theatrics, and you take away, the subjective verbiage he's used, you know what I mean? If you take that away and just go career-focused person, reached the height of his career, chose another career, reached the height of that career, combined careers, made $1 billion, now is able to do whatever he wants. If you're going to say that that's not the life that you want, if that's not the example that you would want to follow, then you're lying. You're simply a liar, because that's what every person is striving for, to become to live a life that exemplifies doing what has come to your mind. That's what everybody wants to do. If you want to do something else, you're lying. To me, you're a liar, because the thoughts that come to your mind, you want to live in a way to where those can reach their highest level. Most people, right? Hopefully those thoughts are positive. Hopefully they're not negative thoughts. But the way that you want to exist is a way where your thoughts can reach their highest level and penetrate the world as deeply as possible. That being said, more people need to spend time studying the example of where they want to go rather than the explanation. To me, by looking at the example, you learn the reality rather than the explanation, which has a lot of, how do I say, like a lot of hot air in it, right? The explanation has a lot of hot air. The example has the bare bones, this is what you need to do, or this is close or similar path you need to take. I've always been more inclined to look at the example, because that's really what's going to happen, right? So if you take my Kid Rock example, you can look at that example and realize that that's not a path you want to take, because you don't have rich parents. So you can't actually follow his example of how he did it. Granted, it was the 90s, so technology was completely different and the world was different. But yet and still, you can't even follow his example unless you have a rich dad who can front you the money. A lot of these examples, you'll start looking at them and within 5 minutes be like, yeah, I could never do that because I don't have the foundation that he has, right? But if you find an example who does have your foundation, right, then you can look into that example and be like, okay, he did this. He started his business with $1,000. He started his business with $50. He started his business with $1,000. Okay, I can save $1,000. Okay, now what? Right? He got his LLC. Okay, I can do that. That only costs this much money, right? So the example to me is more important than the explanation. You will always need to go to the explanation, but I'd rather hear the explanation from the example. And the reason that I wanted to make this podcast episode is because I think a lot of people are waste time in certain arenas of thought, and one of them for me is like business school, right? I think a lot of people who go to study business school, most of them never start a business. Most of them end up working for somebody else's business, and I really conceptually want to know, what did you learn in business school? What was it? I could be absolutely ignorant, and I probably am. But what did you learn in business school? Like, that's really what I want to know. Like, I want someone to explain it to me, because payroll, concepts, bringing a product to market, all things that you probably could touch on. But you'll really need the explanation from the example to start your own business. I don't think that a teacher who's never started a business, which most teachers of business have never started a business. Most teachers of business, they went to college themselves, they're professors, they lived in academia, which is not reality, not even close to reality. Academia, once again, it's all about the explanation and not about the examples. So it's far removed from reality. A lot of academia is far removed from reality. So you got this teacher who's never started a business telling you how to run a business. It makes no sense to me. You know what I mean? Not saying that, once again, people who are hyper-focused on being the example would be good teachers. I'm not saying that, but I do think that academia should focus more, or business students should focus more on looking at the actual example. And this is just me. I've learned more personally, and this is why I'm probably taking it so serious. I've learned more personally from looking at the example. I've learned more. Any book I've read, any life lesson that I have, I've always looked at the example. I didn't care about the explanation. The explanation, when I did deeper research and studying, of course the explanation was needed, but for me, more often than not, what got me to understand in my bones what was going on was looking at the example. Let me see, I guess I should provide reasoning behind this. My mother, I have no memories of my mother not in her work uniform before a certain age. Before a certain age, like 1 to 10, work uniform. Now, what that taught me, that example, was that I need to work, and that work is very important, and that work is probably the number one thing that you're going to be doing while you're here on earth. That's what that taught me, right? She didn't say, I'm working because I have children. I'm working because I got to pay the bills. I'm working, of course, here and there she said it, but overall, I just saw you go to work, right? And I studied how many hours. Okay, on average 60 a week. Okay, so I'll probably be working about 60 hours a week when I reach adulthood. These are the things that I was taught, not from a textbook. You know what I'm saying? I got a friend, his name's Billy McIntyre, and he never told me, hey, join the military. He never told me, hey, go to college. He never told me, hey, work in law enforcement or whatever. But I watched his life, and I watched the example he set, and I said, okay, he went to the reserves. He is now he's able to go to college and do his military career. Okay, cool. He is now in a position to do X, Y, and Z because of his military background. Okay, cool. That's the example. Now, he didn't have to explain, hey, going to college is the most useful tool that you can have to reach the next level. He didn't say that. He didn't say, hey, student loans are, the best way to get a student loan for college is through the military. Didn't say any of that. That's the explanation, and that is true. That is needed, but the example was so much more powerful. I couldn't deny the power of the example, so that was a path realistically that I could take, you see, because I'm able-bodied. Okay, the military will take me. I'm psychologically sound. to a degree. You know what I mean? So the military will take me. You know what I mean? I can go to college based off that. I can follow that path. So the point of all this, or the point of this video, I'm 15 minutes in. I want to keep these 20 minutes, just a quick tidbit. I don't have a partner to play off of for this podcast episode, but the example and the explanation and the distance between them is something you need to focus on and digest. How far away is the example from the explanation? I've harped on the example, but now I want to focus on the explanation. Some people, or not some, a lot of individuals look at the explanation and for some reason, they're not honest with themselves. Like there's a level of dishonesty with yourself when you're looking at the explanation. Like you're not gonna do that. Like once it's explained to you, like you know you're not gonna do that. Like one of my favorite explanations from the example is Kobe Bryant talking about how he practiced. Like his practices were crazy. Like 1,000 shots before practice, 1,000 shots after practice. Has to make 500 free throws before he goes home. Like something that you're just not gonna do. So for people who, not for people, for you who's listening, if you're looking at reaching a certain level or doing something different with your life, and you're looking for, and you're researching it, and you're looking for an explanation, I say you try to tie the explanation with an example. For me, this makes digesting that thought and moving in a certain direction, it makes it easier. Currently, what I'm doing, which is very difficult because it's very secretive and a lot of people just aren't willing to forego this information, what I'm doing is I'm now looking at artists. I've took it upon myself to say, hey, I'm serious about being a collage artist. I'm serious about it. Since I'm serious about being a collage artist, I have to study other collage artists. Now, I'm finding difficulty in seeing how they transitioned from to being the example. I'm finding a difficulty in understanding how they went from a nobody in the art world to a somebody. The explanation is not adding up for a lot of these individuals. However, this is a goal that I chose. No one made me do this. So since nobody made me choose to look for ways of being a collage artist, and no one made me do this, this is the path I chose. So I have to look further into it. And as I look further into it, a lot of these guys are older. They lived in a completely different time. I'm finding it very difficult to find a person recently who's an analog collage artist who has a path similar to mine that I can follow. That being said, I'll end it on this note. No matter how great the example, no matter how great the explanation, no matter how difficult the example, no matter how difficult the explanation, there'll come a point where you reach a fork in the road where you have to like cut out your own path to reach your own goal. I'll say that again. That came out nicely. I would like to repeat that. No matter how difficult the example or how difficult the explanation, no matter how easy the example or easy the explanation, there'll come a time where you reach a fork in the road where you have to carve out your own path to reach your own goal. And that's where I'll leave you. So when you're looking at anything in life and you look at the example and you look at the explanation and the distance between them, know that no matter which one you focus on, no matter which one makes more sense to you, no matter which one you think is better, the explanation of the example, no matter which one, stimulates your soul, at some point, you're going to have to carve out your own path to reach a similar goal. So you're going to have to use a little bit of the explanation, use a little bit of the example, a little bit of intuition, a little bit of ingenuity to get to where you want to go. And that's the core of my entire message and why I even make videos on the internet and why I even make a podcast, is to push people towards learning from the example, picking up as much of the explanation as they can, and making it on their way. That being said, it's been me. It's been an episode of YEAHEAME. We're at 20 minutes. If you made it this far, you're a goddamn star. I appreciate it and thank you for your time. I will speak to you again sometime, somewhere on the internet.